What happens when two of country music's biggest personalities clash on live television? A simple interview question ignited a firestorm that nobody saw coming. The Kelly Clarkson Show was supposed to be a routine promotional stop for Keith Urban. He was there to talk about his latest album, share behind-the-scenes stories, and connect with Kelly's massive audience. But what began as a friendly chat quickly took a sharp turn when Kelly asked a question that struck a nerve. "So, Keith, I have to ask you about something that's been making waves in the industry," Kelly began, leaning forward with her signature smile. "There's been talk about authenticity in country music lately. What are your thoughts on artists who some say have strayed too far from the genre's roots?" Keith's easygoing demeanor shifted. His fingers drummed against the armrest as he responded, "Well, Kelly, that's quite a loaded question, isn't it? What exactly are you getting at here?" Kelly pressed on, unaware of the growing tension. "I'm just wondering how you respond to critics who say that some artists, yourself included, have moved too far into pop territory. There was that article last month questioning whether you're still making country music or if you've crossed over completely." The audience sensed the change in energy. Keith sat back silently for a moment before replying with a sharp edge. "You know what, Kelly? I find it interesting you'd bring up that article without asking if I wanted to discuss it first. This feels less like an interview and more like an ambush." Kelly's eyes widened. "Keith, I didn't mean it that way at all. I just wanted an honest conversation about the evolution of country music. You're one of the most successful artists in the genre, and I thought you'd want to address the discussion." "Address what, exactly?" Keith's accent grew more pronounced as his frustration deepened. "That people want to put me in a box. That success somehow means I'm not authentic anymore." The studio fell silent. Kelly shifted in her seat, trying to steady the situation. "Keith, that's not what I'm saying. I think your music is incredible. I just wanted your perspective on how country music has evolved." Keith let out a humorless laugh. "Here's my perspective, Kelly. I've been making music for over 2 decades. Won Grammys, sold millions of albums, and stayed true to who I am. So when someone sits across from me on national TV and asks me to defend my choices because of what some critic wrote, yeah, I have a problem with that." The tension was palpable. Kelly tried again, her tone softer but steady. "Keith, there's been a misunderstanding. I wasn't attacking you or your career. I was asking about broader trends." Keith leaned forward. "When was the last time someone questioned your authenticity as a pop artist, Kelly? When did anyone suggest your success meant you weren't true to your roots? I bet that doesn't happen very often." He didn't wait for an answer. "You know what the real issue is? Country music is obsessed with policing its own artists. We're told to stay in our lane, sound a certain way, dress a certain way. God forbid we try to evolve." "Keith, I understand you're frustrated," Kelly said defensively. "But I think you're reading something into this that wasn't there. I was asking a legitimate question about industry trends, not attacking you. Weren't you, though?" Keith shot back. "Because it sure feels like that's what you were doing. It's always the artists who push boundaries who get criticized for not fitting the mold." The studio audience watched in stunned silence. Kelly straightened, her voice now matching his intensity. "You know what, Keith? I think you're being unfair. I've had plenty of country artists on this show, and no one else has taken a question this way. Maybe the issue isn't with my question. Maybe it's with how you're choosing to interpret it." Keith's jaw tightened. "So now, it's my fault. Now I'm the problem because I don't appreciate being blindsided on your show with questions. Designed to make me look like I've sold out? That's rich, Kelly. Really rich." Kelly flushed slightly, but kept her composure. "Keith, I think we need to take a step back. This conversation's gotten completely out of hand, and I don't think either of us intended for it to go this direction." "Oh, I think you knew exactly where this was going," Keith replied, his voice rising with every word. You had that article ready to reference, your questions lined up. And you probably thought I'd just sit here and give you some diplomatic answer about how country music is evolving, and everyone's entitled to their opinion. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not going to play that game. The studio crew began to look uneasy, exchanging nervous glances as the interview spiraled out of control. Kelly took a deep breath, trying to steady her voice. Keith, I genuinely didn't bring you here to ambush or make you uncomfortable. I've interviewed hundreds of artists over the years. I always try to ask thoughtful questions that let them share their perspective. If I've offended you, that wasn't my intention. Your intention doesn't matter, does it? Keith shot back. What matters is what you actually did. You sat me down in front of your audience and your cameras and basically asked me to justify my artistic choices because of what some critic thinks about my music. Do you have any idea how insulting that is? Kelly's patience was wearing thin, and her tone turned sharp. You know what, Keith? I think you're being incredibly unfair and, frankly, a little paranoid. I asked a simple question about industry trends, and you've turned it into a personal attack. Maybe you need to examine why you're so defensive about your own music. The words landed like a challenge. Keith stood abruptly, his chair nearly tipping over as the audience gasped. Defensive. You think I'm being defensive? Lady, I've been in this business longer than you've been singing professionally. I don't need to defend my music to anyone, especially not to someone who's never walked a day in country music's shoes. Kelly stayed seated, her posture stiff and her eyes blazing. Excuse me, someone who's never walked in country music's shoes. I may not be a country artist, but I know music. I know authenticity. And right now, what I'm seeing is someone so insecure about their own choices that they can't handle a simple question without having a meltdown. The room fell silent, except for Keith's heavy breathing and the hum of studio equipment. Even the production assistants were frozen in place, watching the confrontation unfold. Insecure. Keith's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. You want to talk about insecurity, Kelly? Let's talk about a host who has to tear down successful artists to feel relevant. Let's talk about someone who probably rehearsed that question in the mirror just to make sure it sounded innocent enough to deny bad intentions later. Kelly rose from her seat, now face to face with him. You are way out of line, Keith Urban. I have never in all my years of doing this show had a guest speak to me this way. And I'm not about to start tolerating it now. And I've never had a host try to humiliate me on live television, Keith shot back. So, I guess we're both having new experiences today, aren't we? The tension was suffocating. Kelly's hands clenched at her sides, and Keith's face was flushed with anger. For a moment, it seemed like things might escalate further, but then Kelly took a step back and spoke with icy calm. You know what, Keith? I think this interview is over. Maybe you need to take some time to cool down and figure out why a simple question about your music sent you into such a tailspin. Because from where I'm standing, your reaction says a lot more about your insecurities than my question ever could. Keith laughed harshly. My insecurities. That's perfect. You invite me onto your show, try to embarrass me with loaded questions, and when I call you out, suddenly it's about my insecurities. You're right about one thing. This interview is over, but not because I need to cool down. It's over because I don't have to sit here and take this from someone who clearly doesn't respect me or my music. If you don't feel respected, maybe you should look at how you're treating the person who invited you here as a guest. Kelly countered, her voice rising again. Maybe you should consider that your behavior right now is completely inappropriate and unprofessional. Unprofessional. Keith's voice cracked with disbelief. You want to talk about unprofessional? How about ambushing a guest with controversial questions they weren't prepared for? How about trying to stir up drama for your ratings? How about acting innocent when you know exactly what you were doing? Kelly shook her head, her tone measured but cutting. Keith, I've built my career on treating my guests with respect and having genuine conversations. I've never once brought someone on this show to embarrass them or create controversy. The fact that you think that's what happened here says everything about your mindset and nothing about mine. Does it though? Keith challenged. Because I'm pretty sure your producers are thrilled right now. I bet they're already thinking about how they'll edit this segment to make it as dramatic as possible. Isn't that what you wanted when you brought up that article? Kelly's face went pale at the accusation, her hurt flashing before hardening into anger. You know what, Keith? That's absolutely disgusting. The fact that you'd accuse me and my team of setting you up for ratings is not only wrong, it's insulting. Do you really think so little of me that I'd sabotage a guest for television drama? Keith crossed his arms, unflinching. I think you're a smart businesswoman who knows how this industry works. You know, controversy sells. You saw a chance to create some with a question you knew would push my buttons. Don't act like you're an innocent victim here, Kelly. Push your buttons. Kelly's voice was incredulous. Now, if asking about industry trends pushes your buttons, maybe you need to look at why you're so sensitive about your place in country music. Maybe the critics have a point if you can't even discuss it without losing your temper. That statement was like gasoline on a fire. Keith stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. Don't you dare stand there and validate those critics. Don't you dare suggest their narrow-minded opinions have any merit. You have no idea what it's like to have your authenticity questioned every time you try to grow as an artist. And you have no idea what it's like to be attacked by a guest for doing your job, Kelly snapped, standing her ground. I've had country legends on this show. Keith Dolly Parton, Garth Brooks, Carrie Underwood. Do you know what they all had in common? They were gracious. They were professional. And they didn't throw tantrums when asked about their music. Keith let out a bitter laugh. Oh, that's perfect. Now you're comparing me to other artists to make your point? That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's always about comparisons in country music, isn't it? Always about who's more authentic, who's more traditional, who's more deserving of respect, Keith said, his voice taut with frustration. Maybe it's about who handles criticism better, Kelly replied sharply. Maybe it's about who can have a professional conversation without making everything personal. Because right now, Keith, you're proving every single point those critics made about you. The words hit Keith like a physical blow, and for a moment he looked genuinely stunned. Then his expression shifted to something that looked almost dangerous. What did you just say to me? He asked. Kelly held her ground, even though the tension in the studio was now so thick it was suffocating. I said, you're proving their point. You're acting exactly like someone who's lost touch with who they used to be. You're acting like someone who's forgotten where they came from. I haven't forgotten anything, Keith said through gritted teeth. But apparently, you've forgotten that this is supposed to be an interview, not a therapy session where you psychoanalyze my career and my motivations. Who gave you the right to sit in judgment of my music or my character? I'm not judging your music, Keith. I'm judging your behavior right now, and it's completely unacceptable. You came onto my show, and when I asked you a legitimate question, you turned it into a personal attack on me and my integrity. That's not the behavior of someone who's secure in their artistic choices. Keith shook his head in disgust. Legitimate question. Kelly, let me break this down for you, since you seem to be missing the point. When you invite someone onto your show and then immediately bring up negative criticism about their work, that's not a legitimate question. That's a setup. That's an ambush. And the fact that you can't see the difference is exactly the problem. The problem, Keith, Kelly shot back, is that you're so wrapped up in your own ego that you can't handle any kind of critical discussion about your music. The problem is that you think being successful means you're above having to engage with different perspectives on your work. Different perspectives. Keith's voice was rising again. Is that what you call it when someone writes an article questioning whether I'm still a country artist? Is that what you call it when critics suggest that commercial success equals selling out? Those aren't different perspectives, Kelly. That's narrow-minded gatekeeping disguised as music criticism. Kelly threw her hands up in frustration. And this is exactly why I asked the question in the first place. This is exactly the kind of conversation that needs to happen in country music. But instead of engaging with it thoughtfully, you're having a complete breakdown on live television. A breakdown. Keith's voice cracked with disbelief. Lady, if standing up for myself and my music is a breakdown, then I'll have a breakdown every single day. I will not sit quietly while people question my authenticity or suggest that I've somehow betrayed the genre that made me who I am. Nobody's asking you to sit quietly, Keith. But there's a difference between defending your music and attacking the person asking the question. There's a difference between having passion for your art and having a meltdown, because someone dared to bring up a topic you don't like. Keith ran his hand through his hair, and for a moment he looked almost defeated. But then his resolve seemed to harden again. You know what, Kelly? I'm done trying to explain this to you. I'm done trying to make you understand why your approach was wrong. You want to sit there and act like you're the victim in this situation? Go ahead. But I'm not going to stand here and let you paint me as some kind of unstable artist who can't handle criticism. Then what are you going to do, Keith? Kelly asked, her voice challenging. Because from where I'm standing, that's exactly what you look like right now. You look like someone who came onto my show expecting softball questions and got upset when I tried to have a real conversation with you. Keith stared at her for a long moment, and the entire studio held its breath. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet, but filled with resolve. What I'm going to do, Kelly, is walk away from this disaster of an interview before it gets any worse. What I'm going to do is leave this studio with whatever dignity I have left after being ambushed on national television. You're not being ambushed, Keith. You're being interviewed. There's a difference, even if you can't see it right now. Keith let out one final bitter laugh. You know what the saddest part about all this is, Kelly? I actually used to respect you as an interviewer. I used to think you were someone who understood what it meant to be an artist, trying to stay true to yourself. Those words hung in the air like a death sentence for any remaining civility between them. Kelly's expression shifted from anger to something that looked almost like genuine hurt. But when she spoke, her voice was ice cold. Well, Keith, I guess the feeling is mutual now, isn't it? Because the Keith Urban, I thought, I was interviewing today wouldn't have turned a professional conversation into a personal attack. The Keith Urban I respected wouldn't have questioned my integrity and accused me of ambushing him. Just because I asked about his music. Keith shook his head slowly, and there was something almost sad in his expression now. You still don't get it, do you? You still think this was just about asking about my music, Kelly? You brought up specific criticism. You referenced a specific article that questioned my authenticity. And you did it in front of a live studio audience without giving me any heads up that you wanted to go in that direction. That's not asking about my music. That's putting me on trial. And you know what, Keith? Maybe you needed to be put on trial. Kelly fired back, her composure finally cracking completely. Maybe you needed someone to ask you the hard questions instead of letting you coast by on your charm and your accent. Maybe you needed someone to challenge you instead of just throwing you softballs and letting you promote your latest album. The studio audience was completely silent now. Some looking uncomfortable, others seeming almost mesmerized by the train wreck unfolding before them. Keith stared at Kelly for a long moment. And when he finally spoke, his voice was deadly quiet. There it is. There's the real Kelly Clarkson. Not the sweet talk show host who claims she just wants to have honest conversations. The one who thinks successful artists need to be taken down a peg. The one who thinks it's her job to humble people who've had the audacity to find success in their field. That is not what I think. And you know it, Kelly shot back. But I do think that successful artists should be able to handle questions about their work without having complete meltdowns. I do think that if you're going to put your music out there for the world to hear, you should be able to discuss it like an adult. Discuss it like an adult. Keith's voice was getting louder again. Kelly, adults don't ambush each other with loaded questions on live television. Adults don't reference negative articles about their guests without warning them first. Adults don't try to create controversy at someone else's expense.